I thought it was interesting because everything going on with the, the House Speaker. We didn't have a speaker for 22 days. It's one of those things to where we're trying to figure out what's the point, what's the purpose, why did this even happen, and how does it even affect us? Because interesting. So many of us are not in politics, but it interests us because it is our money, it is our time, and it's so much of what we hear, whether it's on social media or the news. So it's just kind of we wanted to go through here and see what the hell is going on with this speaker vote and who this new speaker is and why we are where we're here. And I know, Mike, you probably have some questions too. I'll have
Absolutely.
some questions.
Yeah, I think you pointed it out. I think the average person out there wants to know, why did this take so long? Is this another way to highlight government inefficiency? Yeah, I think a lot of people know right now that that's something that Congress is really struggling with right now. And maybe not just Congress, but Congress and up. But when people turn on the news, and I think a lot of people are shying away from traditional news, that's not new news, but are just wanting some commentary around why does this happen? Like, why do we go this long? What's the true impact? I mean, we know nothing can get done without the House Speaker, but I mean, what does it really mean? And what does it show to the American public?
Yeah. So, we just got, I think the news was yesterday that Mike Johnson from Louisiana, Republican, was elected by all the Republicans after I think 3 or 4 rounds before that of not coming to a speaker. So we do have a speaker as of this recording, but before that, I think it was 22 days that the House of Representatives not have a Speaker of the House. So what is the Speaker of the House? What's the importance? What's their duties? Why do we need a speaker? There's a couple different minutia of what they're responsible for like signing bills and administering oath and et cetera. But the big powerful components or responsibilities, I should say, of the speaker is, they're the ones that officially tally up all the votes on the floor. They're the ones, the big one is appointing all the members to the committees. So they are in essence the one who selects who goes into which committees and the subcommittees, et cetera, which is a big deal because, getting onto an appropriations committee where you're kind of deciding what bills are going to be passed about the money and how much we're going to be spending, versus you're on an ethics committee, which you're just going around and seeing if everybody's ethical. Now, I know it's more than that, but there's different committees, and where you are in relation to that speaker, they're going to be able to divvy up those assignments accordingly to how close you are with that speaker or your abilities in that specific area that the committee is working on. So appointing the members to the committees, sending bills and getting the passed in from the committees as well, and deciding which ones are going to be voted on in the House. So the speaker has a very important role in the House and not just getting things done, but selecting who is going to be doing what. And traditionally as well, we saw this with Nancy Pelosi, but they are responsible, or the party really looks for them for fundraising. So every politician is constantly fundraising. In the House, they're voting, getting elected every 2 years. So they're constantly fundraising. So it's, you ask, hey, why isn't the House of Representatives doing anything? Well, half the time they're out raising money and meeting with their constituents and understanding what, the local businesses, the local individuals that they're representing actually need. So a lot of the time they're not actually in Congress, they're back home with their constituents and raising money. So the speaker raises a lot of money. Nancy Pelosi did, and the speaker does. And to that point, when they raise money into the congressional political action funds, or I forget exactly what they're called, we'll get back to that. But when they get that, they're able to determine where that money's going. So if they want a primary, if there's a Republican, let's say McCarthy, there's a Republican that he doesn't like, that's not working the way he wants to work, he might get somebody else to primary another representative and provide funding that he's raised as well to beat somebody who's already in the House. So there's even, you have the Republicans and the Democrats, but there's, each of the parties not really a unified party. It's a coalition of interests. And we'll talk about this too, and why this happened. It's because the Republican Party is a party. It's a coalition of different areas across the country, different different interests as well. So, you can have the Republican Party head within the House of Representatives campaigning publicly against a sitting member of the House that's of the same party. And so it's a very, very important piece on the fundraising specifically for the party. So there's a lot of, whenever all this fighting was happening and people were yelling at Matt Gaetz on the House floor and all those different things, it's because if you look at it, politics, they had somebody that was helping them out, and that they were already working with, and what's behind the scenes. We don't know if there's any other special interest deals as well that McCarthy was helping out, but that's a lot of what Gaetz was going for, was to kind of shut that down. And that's why I think he met such a huge backlash, not just from fellow Republicans. Newt Gingrich called him a traitor. So as an example, not just from other Republicans, or not from, Democrats, but from fellow Republicans as well.
I got a burning question for you, Matt. So why do you think, just looking back at the news cycle and the process it took to get here, okay, so take Scalise, for instance, gets nomination. I mean, was it even 24 hours before he's out? Emmer, same thing. Jim Jordan took it as far as he could, maybe 3 days of that saga. So what do you think has happened behind the scenes to get those guys even into the race? They get the nomination, they're in it. So by the time that decision's made, to the time that they realize they aren't going to get to 218 or aren't going to get the support they're going to need, what do you think has transpired in such a short amount of time? Did someone get in their ear and advise them against it? Or what do you think happened there?
So that's, excuse me. That's a great question. And I think the answer is nobody really knows, and nobody can know, because when you look at how many Republicans there are, you've got 220 Republicans in the House. Just imagine in any work scenario, any work situation that you've been in, let's just imagine 220 people, and that's not just the full Congress. That's just your party that you've got to be working with, that you're making deals with. Some people are junior, they've just came in the last year and a half. I mean, I don't know all the players, but some of these people have been working together, whether it's not socially or in the business, but in politics for years. So there are already, I would say, inside of those coalitions, there's constantly deals, scratching the back of one person to get your back scratched. That stuff goes on. And you also have to wonder, there's a lot of the conspiracy theory stuff as well, as uniparty is just as people holding, I would say blackmail, as somebody using something as blackmail or something like that. Nobody really knows. What we can say is there was enough people that did not like either. I say for Scalise, a lot of them were coming and saying, hey, we don't want we want somebody that we can say, this is our House Speaker, that we can keep going with this speaker. We don't have another McCarthy. We don't want somebody that's just a placeholder, somebody that's older, somebody that has health issues, et cetera. So I think that may take one component of the why that didn't. Mm-hmm. And then the Jim Jordan, there's just, quite frankly, there's enough people that just don't like Jim Jordan. Even within the Republican caucus, if you will, the Republican Party within the House. So
it seemed like of one of the factors that kept getting brought up in almost any news source you'd read on following these stories is that Trump support, or the level of Trump support, played a big part in how much overall support from the House that these guys each got. Do you think there's any validity to that?
I do. I think it's an interesting thing that's happening within the Republican Party, that has been happening within the Republican Party ever since Donald Trump came down the escalator and said that he was running for president, like in the Simpsons episode. Donald Trump was not a Republican. I think we all know this, a Republican in the pre-Trump form, not like Mitt Romney, not like John McCain, definitely not like George Bush. He came in, before he was a Reform Party, before he was a Democrat, but he came in more as a populist, which a lot of people say this is where, the full force of the political machine and the media came down on him so hard, was because he wasn't part of a kind of pay to play in politics scheme. You know, he had participated in it, and he called it out in one of his debates with Hillary, was to say that, yeah, the reason I know how it works is because I use the system. You know, I can say it, I use the system. That's how I know that it's a messed up system from a political standpoint. So I think there is a component to this. The voters that are, you know, being labeled as MAGA or extreme MAGA or pro-Trump or what have you, the voters that are voting for Trump are not necessarily aligned with the Republican Party, as you would say, like the higher ups within the Republican Party. You know, if you look at either one of the parties, you know, what is the big component of being in politics? These people don't get out. They go in and they stay until they're dead. So it's money, control, power in both parties. And you can see that they're raising money from all these companies, these special interests, you know, dealing with these lobbyist groups, et cetera. Well, Trump was kind of outside of that. I'm not saying he was dirty or not dirty. I'm not making any sort of not getting into that. But what is known is he played kind of in a different, he was outside of the norms of what politicians and especially Republicans had before. If you remember, when he was running, they were trying to get him to stop running. Lance Priebus, I think, was the Republican chair, and he was asking him to stop after some of the sexual assault or sexual, I think it was a sexual assault claims that were coming up or different things of what he had said, you know, with his show, Grab Him by the, you know, that one.
Yeah.
So they're trying to get him to step down. He said no. So he's long been at odds with the Republican Party. And when he got in, you know, he has this overwhelming support within the Republican Party. Overwhelming, not nationally, but overwhelming support within the Republican Party voters. Now, the Republican Party voters are pulling away from what would be the Republican Party itself, like the big dogs with the big cats within the Republican Party. They're pulling away, and Trump has driven that divide between the voters and the party leads. You know, the voters are, you know, now if you look at, you know, the Trump voters, they're isolationist. They're, you know, they look more like, hey, take care of us from a social, you know, economic standpoint. You know, we have people that need things here in the United States, which is a populist kind of traditional Democrat view and not necessarily a Republican view. And I think the MAGA or Trump kind of people, the Republican Party leads who are also taking some direction, if not all, from lobbyists, special interests, because it's kind of a revolving door, to stay in and keep control, keep, you know, the tax breaks, all that different stuff. They're trying to take back control of the Republican Party. And I think there's so much, you know, whether it's, you know, started with the Tea Party, then going into the Make America Great Again group, there's such a large portion that's pulling and breaking that up right now. And I think that is the big component of what happened within this fight between Matt Gaetz and former Speaker McCarthy. And so I think that's, you know, you asked the question, I'm sorry for the long monologue here, but it's really wresting control from the populist movement within the House, which would be kind of the Freedom Caucus people, those that are aligned with the Freedom Caucus, which is a small group within the Republican Party that's, I would say, libertarian and kind of Tea Party-esque. But it's that populist kind of group that's pulling away. It's very representative of their voters, but a lot of the House Republican leadership is not necessarily fully aligned. But they know the value of the voters, so they can't come out right, and so they've got to do those gentle pushes and nudges the other way.
Right. Okay. So I think that kind of covers.
Yeah, it makes it interesting because, and not to really speak on the new speaker, but you know, he's a MAGA guy, and he's got that on. You know, he's new. He's come in around the time of Trump. You know, he wrote the amicus brief on the legal way that they should proceed. Yeah, with contesting the election, which has got him a lot of hate on the left because they're saying, hey, he voted to overthrow the government and he was trying to it's not really. If you take a step back from the partisan, extreme or the partisan emotion, he wasn't overthrowing any government. He was looking at from a legal perspective. And I think this is the whole dynamic of this whole thing, looking from a legal perspective and said, hey, is there a framework that this could be contested. And that's what he was writing, was kind of a legal framework. It wasn't, hey, I'm just going to go have a coup and just change the law and change the rule of law. It was, hey, there is a law. How can we do this within law? Not saying it was right or wrong, but he wasn't necessarily, it was an overthrow of the government, but he was participating in the legal review and the legal way to do that. And that's
right. But that is sure to, I would think, potentially bite him later. I mean, to be used against him and say, look, we can throw your record in your face, because, you know, that then gives media ammunition to say, hey, look at this guy. This is what he stands for. And then use that as a way to criticize or discredit him from the left, which that's just the game that we all play these days. But
it's already started.
Yeah. So I've got another burning question for you.
Yeah.
So this is just another everyman type of question. So Mike Johnson, what does his speakership now mean for when it comes to you touched on earlier about the decision-making, I guess, aid for Ukraine and Israel. Now, what do you think him being in the driver's seat in the House is going to do, or how does that impact the aid or our commitments of aid to Ukraine and Israel?
That's a good question. And I'll take it back to kind of one of the reasons why Matt Gaetz, called the vote to oust McCarthy. The big push that, at least that Gaetz had claimed was his reason, was because twofold. One, it was in regards to the continuing resolution to keep the government funded. And two was he really wanted to have single issue bills. In essence, you're not combining Ukraine funding with education funding with, infrastructure funding. You're not doing all these, backroom handshake deals, because, if something can't stand on its own, then it can't stand on its own. And that's what he was saying, that McCarthy had promised they would start doing that when he had been elected speaker originally. And he was saying that he had failed at that. And Gaetz has come out and said, hey, it's not necessarily that Ukraine funding is bad. I mean, in some cases he said it is. He said, but let's look at its merits and look at it individually so we can address this individually the way it should be. So coming back to your original question with Mike Johnson, Mike Johnson is for, and this is kind of one of those interesting dynamics, because just because you're similar and aligned with one other representative in the House on some issues doesn't mean you are on the other, or the others. He is for the funding the Ukraine war, and he's come out saying that we need to fund the Ukraine war, that it's beneficial to fund with our dollars as opposed to American lives, in what he believes is not necessarily an existential crisis for the United States, but for our interests in Europe. But he has come out and said that he will have a Ukraine committee, or a committee set up specifically to work on Ukraine funding. Now, what does that mean? I mean, it could mean that, he's just saying that, but we don't know necessarily what deals were made to get him to that magic number actually past the magic number. He got all the Republicans to vote for him. But that there was some deals in regards to that. So he's saying that he will have a separate Ukraine committee. We don't know what that looks like from the funding, but it does look like that any funding for Ukraine, at least in this Congress session, will be separate from other funding bills. And that way they will be voted on, individually, as opposed to sandwiched in with some other ones. And part of it is, however you look at it, if it's right or wrong, it is our taxpayer dollars. We're over $30 trillion in debt. What does that mean with inflation and the monetary, there's a whole litany of different things that is a component, but that brings why, hey, is this important for us to look at this individually and give it the care it deserves? And I think Mike Johnson is at least paying lip service to that for the detractors of McCarthy, but also for those on the Democrat side and those in the Republicans that still believe that funding for Ukraine is required and is necessary.
Right.
He is real quick. He is a fiscal conservative. So keep that in mind as well. So fiscal conservatives aren't traditionally people, I would say real fiscal conservatives aren't traditionally ones that are saying, hey, not going to pay for that, not going to pay for that. But it's, let's look at that and be conservative and accurate with our spend. So I would say, looking at it from a fiscal conservative aspect, if he feels that it's something that's required, it could be beneficial to where it's a cost of, the results are always going to be 10, 15, 20 years later to see what actually happened. But the idea is, hey, we can be fiscally responsible and support Ukraine at the same time.
Right. So if you are, I guess, before the recent events in Israel, if this were to happen, meaning, this changing or bringing a new speaker in, all that would make sense. What do you think, though, now, if you're Israel or Ukraine, or both of them, thinking, okay, how much aid can the U.S. really provide us? I mean, especially if you assume things are going to escalate in Gaza, like they are, what's the expectation from us, to them as far as support? And I know that's a kind of a hot button issue. I think more so that we're seeing with the public in the U.S. right now because of how many pro-Palestine protests and stuff that we're seeing. How does then the media get involved in either supporting our spend in Israel or condemning our spend in Israel?
Oh, well, our media is going to say whatever their owners want them to say, right? That's how it works. And their owners do also own large stakes in the military industrial complex. So what does that mean for the future? Well, I don't see really the United States not providing support, military, financially, or otherwise, to Israel. And that's so much time has been spent on that. I don't think that's going to change. I think Israel will get the funding. I think it's interesting, and my take is, not having a speaker in the House for 22 days could have possibly averted World War III, because the House is reactionary. That's the whole purpose of the House. The Senate is not. They're elected every 2 years. That way, there's the people and their wants and their needs are reflected every 2 years in their vote. And our government has, everything starts with the people, and the people are the ones that vote in the House. The House is the one that starts the bills. But I think they're very reactionary, but there's enough in there that's going to say, oh, we got to provide Israel anything that they need. Boom, boom, boom. Senate's going to approve it. Joe Biden, or the president, or whoever is up there is going to approve it. Man, we could have just missed World War III by 22 days.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. When you say it that way, I mean, the gravity of the whole situation and how just that short of time can impact, not having a speaker can impact all the events that transpire with that. So that's pretty heavy when you think about it that way.
And look at it, to be honest, there's so many. One of the beginning questions was, how does this affect us? What does this mean? And I'd say, in a sense, it's business as usual, and you're going to, whether it's Twitter or the news media or social media, your friends, whatever it is, they're, this is the worst it's ever been. And can you
mean
believe
X,
this?
formerly Twitter?
Correct. Yeah. Sending all those tweets now. But this is the way a democracy should function, right? It should function to where there's log jams, to where, one group can't just bulldoze everybody else. And I think at a time, it was just an interesting time that this happened, to where, how does this affect us? I still worked. The post office was still working. The hospitals were still working. Food was still on the shelf. Like this 22 days that all the nasty grams and hurt feelings or whatever was going on up there, it didn't really affect anybody unless you were directly tied to something that you were trying to get in front of Congress. If you're a lobbyist or an interest group or something like that was waiting on some of the appropriations, it didn't really, we have already had the government funded for, several more days. I think just people were concerned that we're going to get close to this next funding deadline and not have a speaker. Yeah. But 22 days, and you got to think about it, it really didn't affect us. And it could potentially have saved us. Because now they're just going to go through and do their business and catch up. And nobody was laid off. Nobody died because there was no, our foreign policy enacted by the president, our military is still going, our State Department's still going, they're still doing what they're think they're supposed to do.
But as in any government shutdown situation, you hear about the things that are impacted, but like you said, unless you're someone that's impacted directly. So what if it got to the point where, Medicaid payments are impacted, post offices impacted, that impacts someone's livelihood. And then it's lesser important things to some people, like national parks closing. But which would be important to me as a big fan of the national parks. But all that stuff matters to somebody. And like you said, everything starts with the people. So the people are the ones that are getting frustrated when they see these inefficiencies continually happening in the government. And some of it seems like we haven't seen this in decades or anything come close to this level of inefficiency, that, the inability to put a speaker in the House for 22 days. You're right. In the grand scheme, it's not going to go down as a real big deal, but it's just one more thing that people are just shaking their heads about. Like, why can't we get this together over there?
It's the optics, right? It just looks bad. Mm-hmm. But you also have to look and come back. And for those that aren't like, living and breathing politics or political history or political philosophy, et cetera, you have to look at this and say, this is the way a government should be functioning. There's disagreements, there's tension, but at the end of the day, they're able to come up with a solution and keep going. Right. And that's what happened. And part of the reason this all happened was, look at the inefficiencies of the government. One of them is, okay, the government is way too efficient at spending money. And that's from Matt Gaetz's perspective, right? And those that voted to oust McCarthy. Hey, slow down, stop, like put a cog in this machine right now, because the machine just keeps spending money. Inflation's going higher. And this was from their perspective, right? So you have to look and say, do you want a government to be super efficient within Congress if they're efficient at spending your money as opposed to efficient at taking care of you? Right. And it's bad optics, and it comes out really bad. But on the flip side of it is, how else are you supposed to change that wheel, that money wheel, to keep going?
Right. And there's also probably an expectation to make a decision really quickly, when that some decisions can't be made that quickly and take time. And someone's got to make sure, the right decisions are being made, and that every possible avenues explored in terms of, is this the best decision? Is this best for the people? Is this what's best for America? And so, if everyone already had an answer lined up for every time that scenario was placed in front of them, then we'd be the most efficient government ever. And that might be an unreal expectation, but I think people have it when, armchair critics, right? Everybody thinks that, oh, if I were in charge, I'd have all this figured out, right?
But you look at it, the representatives and all the polls and the results, it's, how do you feel about Congress? And it's historically low approval rating. Congress, they suck. But then it's, what's really important is, well, what do you think of your own congressperson? And that's really all that should matter, right? Because that's who you're selecting to go represent you in a country of almost 400 million people. We're all going to have different points of view. We're all going to have different backgrounds, all different walks of life, different living in different geographies, living with different issues, living with different crises. I mean, we are 50 different states. We're not just some, bland Walmart country to where everybody is exactly the same. And so when you're going up there and you're picking your representatives to represent you, that's what's important, more so than Congress. But it's easy to just look at the news or whatever and say, oh, Congress, they did this, and hate on somebody. You have no ability to say anything or do anything or remove, or unless you have money to, primary them.
Right.
It's because they're not your guy or they're not your gal. So, but I think
overall, I have another question.
Yeah.
So overall, your take on Mike Johnson. So like, was this a good option that the party arrived at, or that, do you think that of the other selections, this was a good choice, or how do you think he got to be where he is? I mean, I know, his law background, I know, well respected, Louisiana, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, do you know of any other specifics about him that could have got him in this kind of position, especially after the failures of the other nominees?
Well, it's really interesting. I don't know that much about him, but what I've read and I've heard some of his speeches, and then he has a podcast with his wife as well. I listened to a couple of those, a Christian podcast. He seems like he's a blend of the Freedom Caucus, the Tea Party, the Uniparty. Like he just seems like he's a blend of MAGA. He's got very intelligent. However, whether you agree with his conclusions or how he goes through things, he has a good mind. And obviously he's a politician. He's smooth. He's good with people, or with the people that he's working with. But he's socially conservative. So he's not just fiscally conservative, but he's socially conservative. And I would say, if you kind of take, I don't know if you remember the Bush era of social conservatism and the Republicans and what they were pushing, he's reminiscent of that from a social perspective side. But he's also has kind of some libertarian takes. But I would say he's more on the George Bush kind of social conservative side, which is strange to me, I think, out of everything. But he still has, I think he's made the deals to satisfy the Freedom Caucus group, to say, hey, we will look at things individually, and they'll stand on their own or they won't. But I think he knows that, hey, he's going to get enough Democrats and Republicans to vote for what they want regardless. And he's going to, make those groups happy. I think he's connected, from his MAGA work, if you will. But he's connected probably with most of the different groups, and has found a friendship or working relationship that all the Republicans were able to vote for him. And he kind of, I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but he kind of came out of nowhere there at the end, which was funny, because a lot of pundits were saying, hey, there was a few group of pundits out there saying, you know what, it's going to be somebody nobody's ever heard of.
Well, it did, and that is true. It did seemingly come out of nowhere, because that was a name like, whoa, okay, well, it's after Jordan. Like, what's going to happen now? Like, who are they going to put out there now?
But
it kind of was.
It's the Barack Obama effect. The Republicans were ready for Hillary Clinton to get the nomination when she ran against Barack Obama. But then it's like Obama starts winning, and you're like, oh, we got to dig some dirt up on this guy. All of a sudden, that it was just like, oh, we spent all this money on Oppo research and opposition campaigning, et cetera, against Hillary. And it's kind of like this, to where boom, out of nowhere, like the Democrats and the pundits, like, oh crap, what do we got to find something about this guy. It's like, oh, he's bad, he's this, he's that, he's going to try to take, again, he's trying to take your rights away, he's trying to do this. So I don't think they were prepared for it. And that could have taken that could have been one of the reasons why somebody like that was selected.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah. So what I would say, why did it happen? This is the way I would say as frustrating as it is, this is the way a democracy should work. Nobody's happy when the government's not doing things. But you have to say, why am I not happy? What do I want them to do?
Even the people that don't want any government intervention in their lives at all, or a smaller government, not a larger government.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not the anarchists,
right.
But you look and you have to look and say, okay, what do I want the government to do? What do I expect them to do? What do I, and to a point, we don't necessarily, all of us understand all the rules and what, you know, the responsibilities of everybody is, you know, down to the granular detail. But what are your expectations? And if your expectations are, hey, let's just stop spending money, you know, just blessing, you know, oh, Republicans and Democrats are working together. That's great. But are they working for you, or are they working for a special interest? Or, you know, working together isn't necessarily a good thing, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's touted, you know, as those, hey, we're working together, this is good. You know, it's touted as a win.
How the media chooses to spin the story and present it to everybody. I mean, and that's how, you know, chatter is generated in social media, and then everything else is based on that. I mean, where you hear the information matters, but trusting the information and knowing where it's coming from is something totally different that I think everyone is really searching for right now too. Is how do I know what's true? And that's a whole other podcast. But but I mean, it matters in things like this because, like you said, how do you know that the special interest isn't the one who stands to benefit the most and not you and me?
Right. Because you're going to get the message from the winner, right? And they're going to spin whatever message is to make it look like it's good for you, or they're just not going to tell us about it, right? But I think it's interesting, you know, as we look through, you know, people say, oh, we're living through history because Ukraine or Israel or whatever, you know, but you're always living through history, and you can go back through time and see, you know, the political machinations where there's disagreements, you know, every 5, 10, 15 years, there's something that if you look back and be like, oh, I lived through that, you know, and the Speaker of the House, you know, getting voted out like that, first time in history, you know, 22 days without a speaker, you know, it's what's happening. But it's for me, I think it's interesting to see how it works, even though it's dysfunctional as it is, because, you know, you think about a family, we're a family of 400 million people, you know, fighting for something, and to see it actually work, to me, it's a good thing. I mean, it took 22 days. It happened. And I think one of the funny parts of all this is the Democrats all voted to oust McCarthy. And their whole thing is, oh, we're not going to be there for McCarthy. You know, he's a Republican. We're just going to let the Republicans show the world, or show the United States voters at least, how screwed
they knew they didn't want to work with him. Nobody wanted to work with them.
And now, because of their immaculate 6D chess that they were trying, now they have a Speaker of the House that is more socially conservative and more fiscally conservative, and now gets to pick everybody on the committees. So, you know, it's one of those things where be careful, you know, what you wish for. It's, you know, would you rather have the devil that you know, or the devil that you don't? Because, you know, the Democrats, and I'm sure they're using this for some political theater as well, so they can look back and go, oh, this Speaker of the House and the Republican Party, blah, blah, blah. But guess what? Now they have somebody it's going to be a lot more difficult to work with.
What do you think? A lot of the focus has been on, maybe his record background, where he lies on aid, but another thing then to consider, based on what you're saying here on the socially conservative side of things, is abortion.
A big one.
That's something that hasn't got a lot of chatter yet, but I'm sure it will as people start to really understand who Mike Johnson is and more information about his background comes out and who he is. I think, or I guess, what's your take on this? I mean, do you think that more protesting, more civil unrest around abortion is on the horizon?
When it comes to social disturbances, especially tied into presidential election cycles, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's kind of like flip a coin. You know, what is the protest going to be about? You know, there's going to be protests. You know, we've seen it from Republicans and Democrats. It's, you know, it's our right as American citizens. We have the right to protest and bring our grievances to the government outside of the voting. But I do believe, you know, you go back, you know, how this has been done specifically in the last 5-10 years. But I think the abortion issue is going to be a significant component of the election, especially when, you know, Gavin Newsom rolls in as Biden's heir apparent, and his big things are, you know, guns and abortion. So, you know, and you look at the president and the Speaker of the House, you have to, what can they do? So it's, you know, there's going to be the protests, but what's going to change really as we look at this? There needs to be, to solve the abortion issue, there needs to be a constitutional amendment defining when you can kill somebody, or what is defining human life. Otherwise, it's your Supreme Court justices. It's the court system that's going to interpret the laws and the Constitution as it already stands. And therein lies your president. So I think maybe they can make things some restrictive, but right now the abortion issue really is relegated back to the states. That was what the Supreme Court has decided when they overturned Roe versus Wade, that is a state's issue. So it'd be interesting to see what the Republicans could actually do, because they're not going to get the support, I'm sure, from the Senate, because that's Senate, you know, that's Democrat led. They're probably not going to get support from enough people in their own party to be able to make any sort of changes. So I don't think they're going to be able to do anything. However, it will definitely be used as political fodder from the Democrats against the Republicans.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you can see it coming.
So I want to end this, and we can close out with a video. This is when Gaetz was. This was when Gaetz was calling basically the vote to oust McCarthy. And just so you know, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, this is one of the things that I'm very, very big on, is money drives so much in politics, and who's giving you the money is so important, right? Like, why would anybody give you money if they're not getting a return on their investment? So I think it's interesting as you look and see a sitting Republican, a member of the House, getting up and calling out his Republican peers for getting all of their money from special interests, and saying he was proud to be getting his donations from individual voters. And they booed him. The Republicans booed him on the floor.
And when it comes to how those raise money, I take no lecture on asking patriotic Americans to weigh in and contribute to this fight from those who would grovel and bend knee for the lobbyists and special interests who own our leadership, who have, oh, boo all you want, who have hollowed out this town and have borrowed against the future of our future generations. I'll be happy to fund my political operation through the work of hardworking Americans, $10 and $20 and $30 at a time, and you all keep showing up at the lobbyist fundraisers and see how that goes for you. I reserve.
Subscribe, like, tell your friends.
Ring the bell for notifications.